In our Prime Minister's own words, domestic violence is a national crisis. In 2026, between 27 to 37 women have already been killed by men. There is a lot to say about the role of the federal government in stopping this issue. I understand it is not as simple as Albanese hitting the big red button in Parliament that stops men killing women. But I could spend a whole video talking about the fact that in his budget speech in 2026 to 2027, Chalmers didn't mention domestic violence until the last 5 minutes of the speech. It was about as long as a footnote. But I also understand that this is not something the federal government can simply fix. It comes down to the states and territories. Unfortunately, it is a lot more complicated than having a conversation or telling people domestic violence is wrong. So what I want to do is I want to take you all to my home state for a second, New South Wales, because we had the New South Wales Domestic and Family Violence Plan that was meant to be between 2022 to 2027. And given we have a state election coming up in 2027, I want to see how good it's working so far. And I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't look good at first. The numbers do not fill you with hope. But I promise you, if you wait until the end of the video, if you can understand everything in context, it's a lot less hopeless than it might initially seem. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're some other stuff, well, welcome back. I really want to thank you for all the support the channel has been getting. In the last 2 out of 4 videos we've posted, we've broken 10,000 views, which is pretty crazy considering I was getting a couple hundred views a few months ago. I really am appreciative of all the hype points the channel gets. It makes it easier for other people to find us. I appreciate all the new people subscribing and joining the community, and I really do appreciate all of the comments. I'm trying to take on your feedback. It's interesting hearing other people's opinions, whether they agree or disagree with me. I do try and respond to as many comments as possible. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, comment, give me those high points. It really does help, and I really am appreciative. With all of that said, let me tell you about that New South Wales Domestic and Family Violence Plan. There's 5 pillars that underpin this plan. The first one is primary prevention, and it sounds like what it is, trying to prevent domestic violence from happening. The cynical side of me says this can be condensed into, let's have a chat about domestic violence. Let's all understand domestic violence is wrong. But the more reasonable side of me understands that is genuinely important. We do need to raise awareness. We do need to be having these conversations. None of that is enough on its own, but it is important. If the only word you know to describe your experience is anger, if the only tool you have to get rid of that emotion is by abusing someone, well, every situation is going to lead to you being angry and abusing someone. We need to have conversations. We need that education. It's important, but it's not enough. The second pillar is early intervention. If there is a family at risk of experiencing domestic violence, are the right systems in place to protect the victims, the children? Is someone able to notice what is happening or about to happen and stop it before it becomes worse? The third pillar is response. How do we respond when someone has experienced domestic violence? How do we respond to the perpetrators of domestic violence? That can be getting people the support they need, getting people through the criminal justice system. That can be getting people housing, the community support they need. Then there's recovery and healing. Again, sounds like what it is. Do we have the necessary systems and funding in place to make sure that people who have experienced this trauma can heal from it, are able to move on with their lives? And then pillar 5 is the systemic enablers. Are there enough systems in place to stop this from happening? Can we appropriately respond? None of those pillars on their own is enough, and none of those pillars being subpar destroys the whole plan. And so the reasonable question is, how have these pillars held up? Has anything meaningfully changed because of our focus on these 5 pillars? And for that, we gotta go to the stats. But unfortunately, the stats are never as simple as we would like them to be. We're going to be using the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, BOCSAR. And when you initially look at these stats, it's really worrying. In almost every single domestic violence domain, the numbers are up. And there is that impulse to immediately go, well, that answers the question. We have definitively failed. The numbers are only getting worse. But as I said at the beginning, stats aren't that simple, because actually, this is the success of Pillar 1. That as you talk about domestic violence more, as you help people to understand that it's wrong, as you tell victims that there is hope, you bring awareness, you are more likely to see the number of reported incidents rise. Although it looks like the overall numbers are increasing, it doesn't actually necessarily mean the number of domestic violence incidents is rising. What evidence is suggesting is that the number of domestic violence incidents is generally stable, but the comfort people have in reporting against perpetrators or reporting that they have experienced domestic violence or support is rising. And so when it comes to pillar 1, we can actually say there is some success there. But then if we jump to pillar 3, we look at our response to domestic violence incidents. This is where it gets a little bit more concerning. Although it is the case that between 2022 to 2025, the percentage of people breaking domestic violence orders has generally been stable, the number of domestic violence orders the police have been giving out has significantly increased. And there's two ways to look at this. If you're significantly increasing the amount of domestic violence orders being given, and generally the percentage of people breaking those is stable, that can be seen as a success. But from a raw numbers perspective, it does mean the number of domestic violence orders being broken has increased. It is hard to get definitive information on how many women murdered had a domestic violence order in place. Some estimate it's up to 1 in 5, and although we don't have a definitive number, what we do know is how many are being broken. And I find it hard to say that Pillar 3 is a success when they are being broken so frequently. And I want to be clear, we can't then say that AVOs are ineffective. Research indicates that although people do break AVOs, they are a strong preventative measure. But overall, police response to domestic violence doesn't look the best statistically. Although it is the case that 67% of the time police took action against a domestic violence perpetrator within the first 30 days, only about 39% of those reported incidents end in conviction. And when we look at the new domestic violence charge that we now have available, coercive control, the stats also don't look particularly good. Of the 326 coercive control incidents reported, only 18 ended up with the individual being charged by September 30th in 2025. Only 3 were finalized in court, and only 1 was proven guilty because they had a guilty plea. That is not a particularly good track record. And although there is some improvements in the fact that anyone was getting charged at all, I don't feel like Pillar 3 was as successful as it should have been. And then when it comes to those remaining pillars on early intervention and recovery and healing and system enablers, work is being done, but some solutions are staring us in the face and it feels like they're being ignored. One of the flagship promises in this proposal was 49 refuges for women to be able to be safe. And at the moment, only 15 of them are actually operational. Community groups desperately need more funding. We need to close some loopholes that allow repeat enablers to still be given bail or allowed to walk the streets freely. It's hard to feel safe or heal when the man who nearly choked you to death has been given bail because it was out of character. There needs to be a greater focus on young men who've experienced trauma getting support to not continue that generational abuse. There needs to be real material support for women to escape domestic violence situations or be given the tools to protect themselves instead of being told by federal politicians to not put up with it any longer. There are major issues on the remaining 3 pillars, and something is always better than nothing. I'm not going to look you dead in the face and tell you that the government hasn't done anything, that there isn't any increased amount of funding, that there are no systems in place to get women funding to leave domestic violence situations. But it's not enough. When someone got king hit in King's Cross, we immediately destroyed this state's nightlife because it was seen as so unacceptable. But when woman after woman is killed and beaten to death and choked to death, we frame it as it's a complicated conversation. It's confusing on what we need to do. We need to make sure people have adequate funding. We need to make sure perpetrators are not given bail. We need to make sure that the people who actually commit abuse are put in jail and these women are protected. And for some reason, every government is kicking it further and further down the road because yes, we are dealing with extremely complicated factors like the idea that in our criminal justice system, you are innocent until proven guilty. The fact that a lot of the times domestic violence is hidden. It is private. You're not always going to have strong evidence of it occurring because it is hidden within the home. Victims are taught to lie because that's how they need to protect themselves. It is complicated. It is nuanced. But at the same time, This state and this country needs to come to terms with the fact that although it is true that it is an education issue and an intergenerational trauma issue and a criminal justice issue, the biggest issue is the fact that we have violent men in this country that no one seems to want to deal with, because it would mean they have to confront the fact that their sons and brothers and friends are domestically abusing women, and they have allowed it to happen because they're too scared or too afraid to put in major changes that are going to lead to the men in their life they have facilitated the abuse of being put away. That is a real discomfort that this country has to deal with. It is hard to look a friend or a brother or a son or a father in the eye and say what you're doing is disgusting and reprehensible, but we need to do it, not just interpersonally, but from a societal and criminal perspective. Major good came from this plan. But if I look at the foundation, if I look at how these pillars have stood firm, I'm not impressed by a couple of them. And moving into the 2027 state election, I like Chris Minns. I don't like how much he tries to restrict protest in this state, but overall, I like him. He's a good man, and I think he's a good leader. But when it comes to domestic violence, every single one of us, no matter what party you support, needs to be emailing your local member and demanding that in clear terms they tell you exactly how they're going to stop the domestic violence issue. Because it's all well and good for us to say something needs to change or the voters want to change, but we need to know exactly in black and white what our state government is going to do to fix the fact that people keep dying. Something needs to change. And it's not the case that the system is collapsing or this domestic violence plan failed, but we are nowhere near where we need to be. If you've made it this far into the video, I truly do appreciate it. Thank you very much. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. The height points really do help other people find the channel. I'll try to respond to as many of you as possible. In the description, I put a link to the New South Wales Parliament where you can see every single one of our politicians. It's going to have their emails, and I truly do encourage you, reach out to them. Ask them what is their plan for domestic violence. I'm really curious to see the types of responses we get back. Please put them in the comments. Please let me know. Obviously, make sure you're polite and professional. Do it in a respectable way that is actually going to highlight your genuine concerns and hopefully get a real response. But I think it's important that we put these politicians on the defensive a little bit. That if you're going to tell me you care about domestic violence, if you're going to tell me that you care about protecting women in this state, I want you to tell me in definitive terms, what is your plan? Once again, I appreciate all of the support. I'm very curious to hear what type of responses you all get. I'll see you all in a fortnight. It's been real.